At first, she just wanted to adopt a dog from the shelter. No plans, no real belief in miracles. But on the third day, he suddenly stopped at the edge of the trail and didn't move. Then he walked off, on his own. And that's when she saw him. An old man, lying in the grass, unconscious. 2 days alone, and no one else knew where to look, except the dog. Sometimes, life gives us stories no one could make up. They just happen. If you want to see more like this, subscribe. The next story is already on its way. River Cloud, Vermont. Autumn 2022. The leaves had started to fall in restless spirals, brushing against the fences of the county shelter. The air smelled of damp straw and distant smoke, and the cages hummed with quiet waiting. The shelter was over capacity again. Volunteers moved through the rows with practiced steps, checking food bowls, logging notes, avoiding eye contact with the dogs that never got chosen. People still came. Couples looking for puppies. Families with excited kids. They picked the playful ones, the clean ones, the ones that wagged their tails and jumped at the bars. No one looked twice at Rowdy. He was older, not gray, not sick, just quiet. A strong-bodied dog with a scar circling part of his neck, like something once tried to claim him. His fur was coarse, his eyes were steady. He didn't bark or approach when people passed. He simply sat in the back of the pen, staring at the far wall, as if he had already accepted that this was where time stopped. Then she came. Sandy Holt didn't look like most visitors. She walked slowly, without excitement or hurry, as though she was looking for something she hadn't yet named. Her coat was too thin for the weather, and her face was tired in a way that didn't come from lack of sleep. She was a school counselor, a widow. She lived alone on the edge of town. No children, no plans. Just the steady rhythm of a life that had softened into routine. The staff offered her a young lab mix, a fluffy spaniel, a small mutt with one ear that flopped the wrong way. She shook her head. Her eyes had already found Rowdy. She stood in front of his pen for a long time. He didn't move. She didn't speak. The moment held no drama, just recognition. Like two quiet souls meeting at the edge of something neither could name. The volunteers said he wasn't a good choice, that he hadn't bonded with anyone, that he'd been through something, they didn't know what, but it showed. They said it like a warning. Sandy took it as a reason. She signed the forms without asking questions. When they opened the gate, Rowdy didn't hesitate. He didn't wag his tail or look back. He just walked out. Not toward freedom, just away from the cage, like it no longer made sense to stay. The volunteers watched them leave, silent. One of them whispered that the dog might not make it in a real home, that he might be too far gone. Sandy didn't turn around. Rowdy climbed into the back of her car without a word, without resistance. He didn't pace. He didn't shake. He lay down and watched the trees move past the window as they drove, his eyes half closed, not relaxed, but resigned. In the rearview mirror, Sandy looked at him. She saw no excitement, no trust, no gratitude, just presence, a weight in the world that had not yet disappeared. Something about it steadied her, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't driving alone. Sandy's house stood at the edge of the woods, not far from town, but quiet enough that you could hear the wind move between trees and the occasional crack of a branch under something wild. The porch was narrow, the kind that creaked when stepped on. There was a rocking chair that had belonged to her husband, and a soft yellow light that spilled from the kitchen window every evening, turning the gravel path gold. Rowdy didn't sleep the first week. He stayed near the front door, his body tense, ears half back, always listening. Not for comfort, for return. As if at any moment, someone might come to take him back to the cage. He didn't cry, he didn't pace. He just watched the threshold like it was a border that could vanish. Sandy didn't rush him. She didn't try to coax him closer or distract him with toys. She didn't speak in the high-pitched voice people use with animals when they want to feel in control. She made coffee, watered her plants, read on the porch. She moved through the days like he was already part of them. Not a guest, not a project, just there. By the second week, something shifted. Rowdy started following her outside, not far at first. A few feet from the porch, then down the short gravel drive, then onto the trail behind the house that curved through the trees. He didn't pull the leash, didn't wander. He walked beside her, matching her pace, head low, ears tracking every sound. He sniffed bark. He paused at patches of earth where deer had passed. He stood still when the wind changed, and each time they returned, he sat at the bottom of the porch steps, like waiting was part of something sacred. Then came the morning he stopped. They had taken the long trail, the one that looped by the creek. The sun hadn't fully broken the mist yet, and the forest held the kind of stillness that only comes before birds begin to sing. Rowdy moved slower that day, nose to the ground more often. Sandy didn't question it. But then, without warning, he veered off the path. He pushed into a dense patch of undergrowth, his body stiffening. Not alert in fear, in focus. Sandy called gently, instinctively. He didn't look back. His tail was down, his ears forward, and something in his gait said this wasn't play. Then came the sound. Not loud, not sharp. A groan, barely audible. Human. Weak. Like something, or someone, had tried to cry out but ran out of strength halfway through. Sandy froze. Rowdy didn't. He moved faster now, not frantic, but certain. Sandy pushed through the brush behind him, branches clawing at her sleeves, the cold seeping in. The noise came again, fainter. And suddenly, this wasn't a morning walk anymore. It was something else. It was a man. He lay curled on his side in the wet grass, half covered by a jacket, his body still except for the faint rise and fall beneath the fabric. His face was streaked with mud, a thin cut traced along his cheekbone. His lips were cracked, barely parted. He wasn't moving, but he was breathing, shallow and erratic, like each breath took more effort than the last. Rowdy didn't bark. He didn't whine. He simply sat beside the man, his back straight, head tilted slightly, eyes locked on Sandy. Then back to the man, back to Sandy, not demanding, not panicked, just present, like he was holding space for someone who'd been alone too long. Sandy knelt slowly, careful not to startle either of them. The man's skin was cold, his clothes were soaked. She checked his pulse, felt it, thin, but there. His breath caught once, then steadied. She pulled her phone from her coat, fingers trembling not from fear but from urgency. She called for help. While she waited, she stayed there in the wet leaves, knees pressed into the earth, hand resting near the old man's shoulder without touching. Rowdy remained on the other side, unmoving, a silent sentry. Every time the wind shifted, he leaned forward slightly, as if trying to keep the man warm with attention alone. They stayed that way until the sirens arrived. The man's name was Henry Scholes, 78. He'd gone missing 2 days earlier after heading into the woods for mushrooms. No phone. Early signs of dementia. His family thought he might have wandered toward the southern trails. That's where the search had focused. But he'd gone the opposite way. He'd fallen, likely the first night. Disoriented. Weak. He'd curled up, as animals do when they don't know what else to do. And he'd waited. Not for help. He probably didn't believe it was coming. But just because he couldn't go further. Until a dog not meant to be here, with a scar on his neck and silence in his soul, found the one person who couldn't call out, and waited with him. The paramedics took Henry away gently, their movements precise but quiet. The gurney lifted. The doors closed. The siren remained silent. Rowdy stood still beside the edge of the clearing, watching. He didn't move when the engine started. Only when the vehicle turned and disappeared between the trees did he finally take a step. He didn't want to get in the car. Sandy waited, holding the door open, not calling him, just waiting. Eventually, he climbed in on his own. Not because he was told, because it was time. That evening, Rowdy didn't settle. He walked from room to room, paused at the front door, circled back to the coat rack where Sandy had hung the jacket she wore in the woods. He pressed his nose to it, then to the carpet, then to the open window where wind pushed through like something looking for someone. His tail didn't wag. His ears stayed half back, listening for something that had already ended. Sandy watched from the kitchen, arms crossed loosely. She didn't try to soothe him, didn't distract. She just let him search, understanding that some journeys don't end at the driveway. The next morning, the phone rang twice before Sandy answered. A local reporter wanted a quote. Someone from the shelter had posted the story. A blurry photo of her and Rowdy in the woods, the stretcher behind them, paramedics crouched, the dog's head turned sharply, as if guarding a secret. The post went viral in town. Comments flooded in. Hero dog. Miracle. Proof that rescues save lives. Sandy read them once, then closed her laptop. Rowdy didn't care about likes or headlines. He didn't understand what it meant to be called a hero. All he knew was that somewhere deep in the woods, there had been breath. Faint, fragile, human, and it wasn't right to leave it behind. 1 week later, there was a knock at the door. Sandy opened it to find a woman standing on the porch, holding a blanket and a large blue ball pressed against her chest. She was in her early 30s, her face soft but worn with sleeplessness. Grief held gently behind her eyes. Her name was Emma, Henry's daughter. She didn't speak at first, just nodded when Sandy stepped aside and led her to the porch. The air was cool. The rocking chair creaked once, then settled. Sandy brought tea but didn't pour it. Some silences didn't need filling. Rowdy stepped outside slowly. No rush. He sniffed the hem of Emma's coat, then lay down beside her and rested his head gently on her boot. Emma looked down. Her hand shook slightly as it moved to touch his ear, but she didn't finish the motion. Her breath hitched instead, and she blinked fast, but the tears came anyway. Not loud, not broken, just soft gratitude that had nowhere else to go. She stayed for an hour, maybe 2, spoke only once, to say thank you. Sandy nodded but didn't answer. There wasn't a word for what had happened in those woods. There was only the weight of something that could have been lost and wasn't. That evening, Sandy opened her laptop and wrote an email to the shelter. The subject line was short: adoption request. In the message, she said she wanted to keep Rowdy, not for a trial, not for another month, for good, for as long as he'd let her. The response came back an hour later. No hesitation, no forms needed, just a line that read, "He was already yours." And he was. Not by contract, not by collar, but by action. By the unspoken choice made in the middle of a forest when Rowdy turned his head, listened, and walked toward a life no one else could hear. Spring came slowly. The snow pulled back from the forest trails like a tide retreating from familiar shores. The air smelled of thawed bark and soft earth. Rowdy walked the same paths as before, but now his steps were looser, his shoulders less tense. He no longer stood guard at the door. He slept. And when he dreamed, it was not of cages or storms. Some mornings, Sandy would catch him gazing into the trees. His ears didn't twitch. His body didn't stiffen. He just looked, long and still, as if remembering something far away that didn't hurt anymore. Henry came home. He had trouble with names now, with dates. But every time Sandy and Rowdy visited, he smiled before the door even opened. His hand would reach out toward the dog without thinking. He didn't remember the rescue, but something in his body did. Rowdy would sit beside him quietly, his side pressed against the old man's leg, and the room would breathe easier. Rowdy didn't wait by the gate anymore. He didn't flinch at sudden sounds. He had let go of the idea that someone would take him back. The past no longer pulled at him. What remained was something new. It showed in the way he moved through the woods, nose to the wind, listening not just for danger, but for presence, for silence that shouldn't be, for stillness that asked for help. And Sandy, watching him from the porch, knew if there was ever another voice that couldn't call out, Rowdy would hear it. Because now he knew why he was still here.